So there's impulse changes of membrane potential along the neuron. What does it mean by when we say the changes of membrane potential? When we talk about the axon, axon ataupun the cell, dekat membrane dia, dia ada separation of the charges. The negative, kalau resting negative inside the cell, positive outside the cell or exterior of the cell. So this separation of the charges that contribute to the membrane potential. When we talk about the changes of membrane potential along a neuron, it means that there's a changes due to the movement of ions. We have sodium ions, we have potassium ions. Sodium ions, the concentration of the sodium ion is high at the exterior of the cell or outside of the cell compared to inside of the cell or cytosol. So when there's a strong stimulus, the sodium ion from outside of the cell with positive charge will move into or diffuse into the cytosol and cause inside the cell or cytosol more positive. So there's going to be a change of the ions, a change of the membrane potential, because initially during resting, inside negative, outside positive. So when there's a movement of ion, for example, like sodium, that diffuse into the cytosol or interior of the cell, so it makes inside the cell more positive. So that are going to be changed. Or if let's say that the potassium channel or the voltage-gated potassium ion is opened, then a potassium ion will diffuse out of the cell. Yang tu the rising phase of the action potential lah. Okay, sebab dia ada two types of ions that involved in this action potential. There is sodium ion, there is potassium ion. Potassium ion, the opposite to sodium ion. Potassium ion, the concentration of potassium ion is high in the cell compared to outside. That is masa resting lah. So maksudnya the movement, the direction of the potassium ion, dia always diffuse out of the cell. Maksudnya kalau potassium channel is open, so potassium ions will diffuse out of the cell from the interior or the cytosol to the exterior of the cell or extracellular fluid. So bila dia keluar, kan dia bears positive charge. So inside of the cell is more negative. That can lead to repolarization, hyperpolarization semua lah. So you can see that there's changes of the membrane potential depending on the stimulus. Okay. Neuron receive stimulus, membrane potential change. Yang ni saya dah explain tadi. Okay, depending. Kadang-kadang kalau when we talk about the weak stimulus pun, ada stimulus. Bila ada stimulus, there going to be a movement or diffusion of sodium and potassium juga. It's just that ni gradient potential kalau is weak. If it's strong stimulus, if it's very, very strong that reach the threshold level, it will produce the action potential. So membrane potential change by movement of ions across membrane through voltage-gated ion channel. Yang ni I've already explained using example just now, the sodium channel or sodium voltage-gated ion ataupun potassium channel. Okay, following concentration gradient. Bila kita cakap following concentration gradient, it moves down concentration gradient from higher concentration to lower concentration. Again, you have to remember that during resting membrane potential, the concentration of sodium ion outside of the cell is high compared to inside of the cell. So that's why when there's a strong stimulus or when there's a stimulus, the sodium ion will diffuse into the cell. Daripada high concentration outside tadi, move into the cell which is lower concentration. And then kalau kita compare with the potassium, resting membrane potential, dia high concentration inside of the cell or inside of the cytosol. So the movement, the direction, down concentration gradient, so it move from cytosol, to be inside of the cell, to outside or exterior of the cell, down the concentration gradient. Okay. You boleh faham tak? Can you understand? Everyone?
Yes, madam.
Yes, madam.